Thank you. So, hello, my name is Soren, and we can see here happier members of our non-human family, including one of my cute little cats. And I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about myself, so to make a bit of a connection with everyone, if that's okay. So I was born in communist Romania in Eastern Europe. It was a time of austerity and poverty. And I was also alive during, and I also passed through the 1899 revolution, where communists fell all over the world, leaving capitalism as pretty much undisputed as a way to produce our economy. And things didn't change much after the revolution. I still remember actually during the revolution, I remember when I was tiny, I was hiding under a table, and I still hear the buzzing of bullets, hearing them. It was a pretty tumultuous time. Things didn't change very much after the revolution. Like the system that was very tyrannical went to a system that was very corrupt and a semblance of democracy. So my parents were very disappointed, and we decided to leave Romania and go to possibly better lands. So we went to Turtle Island. Right now I live in the land claimed by Canada. And I was a software engineer for most of my life, as far away as possible from poverty and austerity, trying to live the individualistic and materialistic life as much as possible. And I was quite a bit of a hedonist. Something happened in my life which has marked it. We can see on this picture my father and me, and he has died when I was pretty young, when I was 28. And that embarked me on a sort of, I started to ask myself a lot of questions about the meaning of life, and I read a lot about Buddhism, and that led me to read a very important book wrote by Mathieu Ricard, Pleading for Altruism. I heard of him because he was also from the West, but going into the East and becoming a monk. And he was, oops, not sure what happened there. Give me a minute. There we go. Yep, as I was saying. So he went from the East, from a Western culture to an Eastern one. And in his book, he did talk a lot about our unfair treatment of non-human animals. So that got me to turn vegan. Another fun fact about me is that around a year ago, I have quit my job with my partner as well as my apartment, and we moved into this RV, and now we are full-time activists. About the activism that I'm involved with. Buddhism got me a lot about thinking about alleviating suffering and alleviating suffering of all sentient beings that do feel suffering, or not just humans. And one of the first organizations I got involved with was the Algosphere Alliance, which taught me the importance of having an ethical priority given to the alleviation of suffering. And I'm mentioning that because there's always a bit of a tango between alleviation of suffering and also priority given to life and reproduction. So we're always pulled into these two directions. We want to avoid suffering, but we also appreciate life, and it's a cool tango. Not all suffering, some of the suffering is mild. So I got involved in the Organization for the Prevention of Intense Suffering. At some point a few years ago, I got involved and founded Vegan Option Canada with my partner. And lately I got involved in Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion. And finally, we come to the subject of this talk. I'm on the organizing committee of the Plant-Based Transition Coalition, which is a coalition of organizations, a very new group. But before going into it, I just wanted to share a survey result. We've asked all of our members if they see a benefit in partnering with each other to achieve their goals. And as we can see, almost everyone said yes. Some of the goals of this coalition is to achieve unity. Our motto is alone we go fast, together we go far, which is an African proverb. when we try to achieve unity, we first need to focus on what we have in common, and then we need to respect and appreciate our differences. I'd like now to go to a quote which I find inspiring by someone I respect very much, Gandhi. And I heard that he said something like this: I am committed to the what because of the why, before knowing the how, before he actually started to work on on the India liberation movement. And although he didn't know exactly how he was going to do it, he knew that he was going to do it and that he had to do it because it was so important. And this few lines will also maybe guide us through the rest of this talk. So when we talk about the what, the coalition is a collaborative effort that uses a combined theory of change to bring about a transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system. Our aim is to organize food system reform, which is to converge a maximum of human potential towards this objective. I thought it would be good to add one definition of organizing, which is leadership that enables people to turn the resources they have into the power they need to make the change they want. Community organizing is about people, power, and change, and it starts with people and relationship, and it focuses on shifting power. There are 5 key leadership practices, and we're going to see a little bit more about this: telling stories, building relationship, structuring teams, strategizing, and acting.
You can hear me.
The mission of the coalition.
Oh, maybe
Hello? The mission of the coalition is...
Go ahead.
The mission of the coalition is to build collective power for our members, to create a Canadian food system that is helpful for all, fair to all people who grow, distribute, and prepare our food, and honors non-human sentience, all while averting future crises coming from the climate emergency, the ecosystem collapse, and future pandemics. And our main mission mentions a transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system, but I'd like to say that this also means to live in a vegan world, to achieve animal liberation, and to dissolve speciesism. To me, all of these things is just different ways of saying the same thing. And sometimes when we work together in our organizations, we have discussions about which one it should be our ultimate goal. Should it be vegan world, animal liberation? Should it be, should we discuss speciesism to go to the root cause? And it's just one way of, we chose the one that has the least opposition right now, but it all means one thing. When we go into the why, I think most of you are aware on why this is important. The first one, we saw it in the first screen when we took a moment of silence, that non-human animals are sentient beings, and we should include them in our moral community. They can feel suffering and should be treated fairly, and there's no reason to stop our compassion and justice at our species. We need to prevent that. We need to protect them from harm, to care them and protect them from preventable death. And finally, I believe that it is our ethical responsibility and moral duty to do so. Why also goes, we're in an environmental crisis. Most of us know that. There's climate change, ecosystem collapse, the 6th mass extinction. I'm not going to spend much time here. Like there's generational and global equity. We have a massive generational and global equity problem, massive pollution, and our oceans are dying. We also have a human crisis, like a personal health crisis, obesity, diabetes, heart disease. We are in our 2nd year now of massive pandemic, which is approaching many countries of the world, its 3rd wave. There's antibiotic resistance that is building up, which means that we have superbugs, workers in the animal-based food system, that their treatment is very unfair. We've seen many articles during the pandemic of how they were forced to keep working and they were even more exposed than everyone else to the pandemic. So for collective liberation, intersectionality, and for the universality of justice, this is an important cause. I think that a good way of putting it is because it is the right thing to do. So sometimes I've heard that, again, going back to Gandhi, all India was with him when he was trying to do his movement. But for us, we are so few and everyone is against us. And yet I don't think that that's a right shift. It seems that a plant-based food system is in the interest of every human and non-human animal alive or not yet born. So I think that is a better narrative or way to view it, where we're not against anyone, we're all one, and it is in our interest. And this is an interesting part. Before knowing the how, I think that it is important to accept that what we're talking about is among the most complex social changes in the history of the world. The food system is complex, and in a global system is even more complex. So it's a complex problem, and it requires system thinking and collective intelligence. And we do have quite a few interesting solutions that have been presented during the convergence, but I don't think the how is yet clear. Complex, a few more words about complex issues. Generally, they're multidimensional, and when we try to reduce them to a single dimension, we sometimes make dramatic mistakes, and we do a solution in a unidimensional field, and sometimes we make problems worse. We need to think about all of the interconnections on a systems level perspective. And what we're trying to do is just so of an order that's so unimaginable that we do need to accept that and start conversation from that perspective. In fact, in the age of information, globalization, and complexity, we do need new insight models and vocabulary. We can see some things on the left, like we need adaptive. We need to get adaptive. We're more and more connected. We're no longer disconnecting. Things are very dynamic. They are not static. Many systems that were closed are becoming open. We need to become resilient, and things that were opaque are now transparent. And most importantly, we need a particular whole new tool set to think about this, which involves system thinking, self-organization, adaptive capacity, network theory, and nonlinear systems. When we talk about systems thinking, one of the ways that we thought we could address it or start addressing it with the coalition would be, well, we have started to create an advisory committee. And these are the 6 advisors that have agreed to join our advisory committee. And we also have an organizing committee, which is a group of self-selected coalition members from these organizations. And all these people can act together at a think tank trying to do that collective thinking that we had discussed, from using their particular expertise in order to try to approach from the problem from different perspectives. I think an important point to when we talk about complex system is the dynamics between the micro and the macro systems. And micro, what I mean is individuals, and macro, what I mean is the collective and the systems and how they are connected. I could stop a little bit and ask, how would this apply to our vegan movement? What would be the micro level for us?
Probably the micro level would be the food, growing food, whether it be local or transported from a remote area. And on a macro level would be the government rules and regulations protecting animal health.
Yes, thank you. Does anyone else want to answer something? Thank you, Ankit. From one of the ways that I was saying that is individually, like on the micro level, in our movement, we do have the individual change versus system change. So there's also that we could also see it from that perspective. And what is important, what I've learned through my history and through my looking a bit of the world is that we don't need it. If we focus a lot on the individual, we're going to end up with an individual materialistic society like we have now in the West. If we do focus too much on the collective, then there's the danger that we're going to end up with the societies like they were in Eastern Europe. And none of these are particularly good. What is important is the balance and the constant feedback between the two, and to accept that both needs to coexist into a healthier, more balanced way. And that brings us to our next topic, which is movement ecology. So our theory of change in the coalition is that we respect the interdependence, intentional and intentional, between all groups who are working to create healthy and sustainable changes in the Canadian food system. And we accept that this sometimes this different theories of change sometimes create a movement ecology. So I mentioned before in the previous slide, personal individual change versus system change. So there are three main theories of change, where we could oversimplify, because there's probably more, but we can oversimplify a little bit and say that there's three main categories, which is personal transformation, dominant institution change, and alternatives. So personal transformation for us, it would be the Go Vegan message, individual change. Dominant institution change would be changing policies. And alternative institutions for us, it could be having vegan eco-villages. Actually, alternative institutions is starting to live the way that you want to live and have a new system. So no longer waiting for the system to change, but create your own system and start to live it. So perhaps vegan eco-villages. I can mention very quickly that the dominant institutions can be further spread into three other dimensions, which is insome's game, which means actually changing policies, such as what Animal Agriculture Alliance is doing, or in Canada, Nations Rising. We have structural organizing, which is a little bit where our coalition is placed, which is trying to grow community and trying to grow power, and mass protest, which is what Animal Rebellion is doing, or Extinction Rebellion, or direct action. I have mentioned before self-organization, and when we are trying to build collaborative power, there's two ways that humans have so far found to do it. Either we increase hierarchy, either we increase the level of connections and relationships. So hierarchy usually works very well in the short term. It is very effective. It gives short-term results very fast, and it's still in all our corporations. It's in many of our governments. It is not adapted to complex systems and to nonlinear systems. So eventually it fails in those cases. And it is in those cases that social networks and self-organized systems are appropriate. And I think since we were talking about organization, I did want to bring one more dimension to organizing, which if you remember, I said that is the aim or the goal of our coalition, to help organize. So organizing generally has two dimensions, which sometimes are mixed. And one of them is building your power, and the other one is spending your power, which is referred to as mobilizing. So organizing is when we try to create petitions, perhaps to get more signatures to broaden our base, or when we go door to door, or anything that increases our level of support. So that's building our power. Mobilizing is getting off the couch and going to do the protest today, or creating the campaign and acting on it today. So our coalition is not focusing on mobilizing because we're a coalition of organizations who are already doing that. So many of the organizations that exist already have their own their own ways in which they are acting and in which they are mobilizing. And some of them also have organizing, but this is organizing inner, like we see here, the social network, inner organized, in between organizations. So self-organizing between organizations. That's where we're trying to bring a bit more collaboration, more networking. And perhaps we can take a little journey down the activist path. This is different for everyone, so I'll go into my own. And when we notice something that we need to change, well, first we change ourselves, and then almost immediately we try to change others. Sometimes we try to change others before changing ourselves, but generally this is how it is. And when I first went vegan, I remember I was a very angry vegan, and I was doing a lot of posts on Facebook, and I was alienating all my friends, my family, and I was just trying to get everyone to go vegan. And I did have little power, and I had almost no wins. A few people turned vegan, but not that many. It's not the same for everyone else. Like maybe some of us had way more success as an individual. And when we notice that as an individual we're not successful, we join or create an organization. In my case, I had helped found and create Vegan Option Canada. And as an organization, we have medium power. So we do have some wins, which is good. That's something that needs to be acknowledged. But organizations by themselves, or just one organization, it is not enough to change the whole system. And that's how movements get born. And movements, if they have the right elements, they do have the potential to create lots of power, many wins, and to reverse a whole system. So what would be some of elements of a movement? Well, one of the most important ones is to have winning campaigns. And we're going to see this one in a bit more detail on the next slide. But basically, a campaign is something that gives ongoing feedback and appeals to the 4 fundamental roles of change: organizer, advocates, rebels, and community builders. And we'll see that a bit on the next slide. There's a few other elements to creating a movement. One of them we've already seen, like we do need to acknowledge there's a movement ecology. And the other ones, if I am to oversimplify again, I like to refer to a movement, and we've seen this in our first slide when we were discussing organizing. A movement could be like a table with 4 legs. It has a strategy, a narrative, a culture, and a structure. And to describe those in a bit more detail, I could take the analogy of an organism. And as an organism, if we're moving through the world, we need a direction where we're going and how to get there. So that would be the strategy. We need a way to interact with the world, discuss how we are discussing today. And that will be our narrative, the stories that we take. And over here, there's tool sets that we can use, such as layout frames and metaphors. And I'd like to refer to these 2 dimensions as the external dimensions, because they're about how we move into the world, how we get to where we get our goals, and how we communicate them, and how we communicate in order to bring more people to our cause. So those are the external dimensions. And there's 2 others, which are the internal dimensions, which is how do we communicate internally with ourselves? How do we, for example, if I go back to my organism metaphor, an organism has a nervous system which communicates very quickly. It can have local chemical communication. It can have the blood that brings nutrients all over the cells. So for movement, we can have restorative circles for solving conflict. We can have nonviolent communication, sustainable activism, so regenerative culture, which keeps us going, and good relationships among ourselves. And the final dimension, which is our structure, and that is how is the organism formed? What organs, what organelles, what skeleton, what are the tissues? And that can be provided by a decentralized self-management structures, by self-organizing. And these pillars are generally linked by our governance systems. How do we take collaborative decisions? And when we first start to interact, there's a few dimensions of how we can take collaborative decisions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we can have duocracy, where you can do it, and if you don't like what's done, just do it yourself. There can be consensus, when we want everyone to agree. There can be consent, where we don't want anyone to object. And finally, we can use advice process. We can see this in a bit more details if at the question period. I did mention campaigns, so I'll go in a bit more details about what I meant. A campaign makes a demand and focuses on specific targets that can yield that demand. And campaigns are ongoing and invite participants to play what strategies Bill Moyer calls the 4 fundamental roles for social change, which are organizers, who are attracted because they see potential for growth. So organizers like to create growth. Helpers and community builders, they enjoy helping people. So they enjoy getting involved with the campaign because there's always need for mutual aid and sustainable activism. I refer you to what I said before with the degenerative culture. And advocates, they are attracted because they see the chance to actually interact with the influencers and decision makers, and to see the change that they want to see into the world. And finally, rebels are attracted because direct action is a place where people like them, who are unafraid of confrontation, of conflict, get to actually do what they like to do, and that is oppose the system. So these are, again, some simplifications from Bill Moyers. I'll added the references here, and we can see a bit more at the end. When we create transformational change, there's a few steps that we can follow. First, we need to define the change we want to see. Then we need to create a spectrum of allies. And we've seen this before in other presentations. I'll see it on another slide. The next step is to identify the pillar of powers, which can be media, education system, government agencies. An important steps is to realize that it doesn't matter how popular we are. If we don't have institutional support, if we don't manage to find a way to link into the system, into governments, into parliaments, into the places where the decisions are made, well, there might be little change. And the last step is to seek to attract rather to overpower. It's important to realize that anger is an effective mobilizer, but without hope, it's a destructive force. There's another quote that comes to mind here from Martin Luther King. I'm quoting it from memory, so I might be wrong, but I believe he said something like, you need to have a firm will, a firm spirit, and a soft heart, which means have no doubt and have faith that you're in the right cause, but have compassion and love for everyone. And last point, it is best to start with small, achievable goals. On the spectrum of allies, we've seen this before. If we were in the conference with United in Heart and Arvin, he has showed us a way more developed version of this, where the goal when we have a spectrum of allies is knowing yourself and knowing who are your allies, who is the opposition, and finally devising strategies that is just going to bring everyone one level over, all while forgetting about the active opposition. Like generally the active opposition is not going to change. They have too much involved in the game opposing you, so you leave them, but you concentrate on taking everyone else one level over. And if you manage to do that, you're on the brink of victory. I thought it would also be interesting to share some other survey results. And also everything I've said so far might have been quite abstract, and I'm sorry if it was a bit overwhelming. I'll develop as much as possible in the question period, but we do have some actual strategic objectives that have come out of the discussions within the members of the organizations. And those are to repeal and prevent ag legislation, to redirect subsidies from animal agriculture to a sustainable plant-based agriculture, to transition animal farmers to plant-based alternatives, to enact Bill of Rights for non-human sentient animals, and to increase plant-based foods in public institutions. And here we can see some of the organizations that have filled that survey and that are interested in working, that are currently working within that. So for repealing and preventing AGAG, for redirecting subsidies, for transitioning animal farmers, for enacting a Bill of Rights, and finally for increasing plant-based food in public institutions. And another interesting result I thought I would share is what people would like the coalition to assist them in doing. And the first one would be resource pooling, access to resources, skill building. And we are trying to do this and working on this in general meetings by going into case studies. The other one is network information sharing. And this is very important because what we have is the possibility to increase our social dynamics and our connection. That is our strength. We don't have on our side the capital that our corporate opposition has, but we do have numbers, and we could increase collaboration in order that 1 + 1 is bigger than 2. A third one is shared mission. Finally, I think I will just take you, before stopping and taking question, to the website. We have, well, and maybe show a little bit the organizations that are within the Plant-Based Coalition. This is, and it has started as a Canadian movement. However, we have accepted, and we have gotten with some organizations that are, and we have seen here, United in Heart and Climate Healers, that are in North America, but do have potential to affect Canada as well. And perhaps as we expand, we will take more organizations from the States as well. But for now, it was mostly Canada. What else could I show? Well, the goals, we have seen them, the mission, the advisory committee, we've seen the resources, I think are pretty interesting. And the reason I want to show them is that much of what you saw in this presentation comes from these resources. So when I talked about campaigns and what a campaign is, comes from this article. When I talked about the roles for social change, it comes from this article with about more details. And if you want to identify perhaps if you fall in a role or another, you could go and read it. There's a case study, very interesting case study, the dilemma demonstration, which happened in Montreal, in which one of our advisory board members is involved, Michael Gagné, or was involved. A study from lessons from social movements from the British anti-slavery movement. So how can we apply what we've learned to the movement from animal farming? So you can also find a reference to that. And if you don't like studies, we do have a massive amount of videos that are targeted at organizations and at activism. So there's a few from the PBTC. There are a few from organizations within the coalition, such as Animal Rebellion, Strategic Messages and Campaign Design, Effective Vegan Activism from Melanie Joy and Tobias Leinart. I'm sure many of you know about carnism. And social movements, I discussed a lot social movements, and lots of what I discussed comes from this. System change, I described a lot of system change and what it means, complexity, so this also can be accessed. I discussed governance and self-organization, so going beyond hierarchy. So there's a lot of videos that help us to have an introductory an introduction to the field of what is self-management, why it is important, some misconceptions. People think that self-management means there's no rules, everyone does what they want. That's not it at all. I think maybe I didn't mention holacracy, sociocracy as systems that exist for self-organized system, but they're here. I mentioned narratives. I think I mentioned metaphors and Lakoff frames. There's George Lakoff, if you haven't heard of it. It's very interesting to watch more of more of a regenerative culture, so sustainable activism, restorative circles in order to approach conflict in a different way, to welcome it. The collective liberation strategy. Well, finally, there's a video about phase shifting humanity, which is very similar to the narrative of going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And I guess a few more documentaries from Adam Curtis, which explores power struggles in the world in a very creative way. It's possible to subscribe for everyone in order to get the news. And I think that I will stop here. And thank you everyone for your attention. And I am ready to, if there are any questions. I'm really sorry if there was.
Jyoti?
Hey, thanks, Dr. Kailash. Hey, Soren, this is a really great presentation. You can almost teach a doctorate level class on social movements. So really appreciate you and your leadership and providing all the resources on your website. My question is just comparing the various social movements, and sorry about the drumming, the Black Lives Movement, and what are some of the best practices and some of the weak spots for our vegan movement? Because we only have 5% of the population which are veg friendly. So what can we learn from these other social movements?
Thank you for the question. It is a very important question. And when I was talking about the different dimensions, which was the external and the internal dimensions, I think that generally all movements are sometimes ignoring the internal dimension, so culture and structure. So we are so caught in the fire of action, and we are so caught in the emergencies that are happening. So we are so reactive that we forget to we forget to care about each other, and that we're also living, breathing, sentient beings. So there's a lot of burnouts that I have observed within our movements, and that's because of the lack of regenerative culture, because of the lack of caring for each other, building healthy relationships. So that would be one first step. And the second one is, if we do not have a strong organizing structure, then our level of collective power is going to be weak. So that is something also that I have observed within our movement, but it happens in other movements as well. Because these things that I've mentioned, they are not describing of the vegan movement. The vegan movement is not different from other movement, except in what you say, that we are fewer. We are feeling at this moment the same. So there are toxic habits in society that just get reflected within all of us and within our movement. So we just need to try to address them by improving our culture and improving our that would be my first answer. I can develop more if that didn't help. So how did that sit with you?
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Karen, do you want to ask your question, or should I ask it for you? Okay, Karen is asking, I heard that it takes 3.5% of the population to creating a tipping point for social change. Do you know how close the vegan movement is to this tipping point? And we haven't mentioned we could do to accelerate this.
So I do not know how close we are. I have an impression that we're very far. I see Arvin in the audience, and I have a feeling that he could actually answer that better than me because he did some studies from his. So do you know, Arvin, how close we are? Do you have any?
So I don't think we're, so help me out, Soren and Sailesh on this, but I don't think we're quite a unified movement yet. So even if, so the number that I found is 2% of the world population is vegan. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But it doesn't matter because we're not speaking together. We're not a unified voice. We're not really working lockstep together. So I don't think that there's actually a number because I don't think we're actually working off the same playbook yet.
Thank you, Arvin. I totally agree with that, and that is when I was discussing before about increasing the collaboration, the organization. This coalition is an attempt to try to increase that within the organizations, at least here in Canada, in order for us to try to speak together and to do exactly what you said. Because it's true that maybe 2% are vegan, but out of those 2%, not everyone is a vegan activist. So not everyone is working towards that. And of all the vegan activists, not everyone agrees to unite and work towards it. Doesn't mean everyone has theories of change, and that is important. I did say in the movement ecology. However, there's a time and space for everything. So there's a time where we need mass protests. And then after that, we need policy change. After a mass protest, politicians will be more willing to do the policy change that is required. So if we request policy change too early, and there's a time for individual change in order to grow, to get to grow the base. There's a time for alternative institutions because those provide the core. So there is no, I can't suggest, I don't have enough experience to suggest how to get there faster. I think that Silas Rauch had an amazing strategic plan, like for a plan that to get us to a vegan world 2026 with the 7 steps. That was one of the most impressive ones that I've seen. Like start by educating, remove the SDGs, but we do need to implement those together. So we do need to. Silas, would you like to add something on this subject?
Well, thank you, Soren. Yeah, we need to work together. And this is the idea behind these convergences, is to get us to start talking together and helping each other get better at what we do, each one of us. Because I think if each one of us is, there's a question from Sue Oliver. Is the lack of coordination because there are ethical, environmental, and health vegans? Or is it geographic due to country, culture, and regulations?
That is a very interesting question, and I can only guess the answer. I think that the lack of coordination is just because it is part of the some of the systemic problems that we have. We're just not used to yet collaborating together in different ways than the hierarchical systems where we are used to collaborate. For example, we're always, even in our families, we are, there's the parents that are telling us what to do, and we know we're being told what to do and we're going to do it, and that's it. And then there's, we go to school and the teacher tells us what to do, and we just do it. Then we start working and we have our boss who tells us what to do. So we need to get out of that and start building connections among ourselves, and then taking responsibility and accountability. So that's another part. Like there's we tend to make a barrier between us and them and say the problem is them. I'm good. Everything I'm doing everything I need, but it's everyone. The problem is them. So but it's not them the problem. It's all of us. So that's I think that it would go into this direction if I were to guess. Now, obviously, there are cultural differences which cannot be denied. So there's definitively cultural differences. I think that within the fact of those who want a vegan world or who want to achieve this movement, who actually want it, that the cultural differences aren't that strong. We all want the same thing. Now, if we go into the fact that there's ethical vegans, environmental vegans, and yes, I can see that there are some difference of opinions, but I think, remember when I said first we look at what we have in common and then respect our differences, I think it's important to discuss those different perspectives and where we disagree, and then from the thesis and antithesis, build a synthesis. So that I don't see disagreement on those level as a problem. That's also why I said that it's a complex change, and I'm committed to the what because of the why before knowing the how, because we all have different hows that we think is the way. But instead of arguing, why do you think it's that? Why do I think it's that? Okay, well, so that's my best shot at it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a couple words on the coordination question.
Please.
I think that I think Soren, that was a good answer, and I think just to add to that a little bit, I think that there's an information cost problem, and what we need to do is we need to drive down, we need to be able to drive down those information costs. It's not, I agree that it's not so much as the reason why you want the world to go vegan. If person A wants the world to go vegan because of environmental reasons, and second person because of another reason, they still want the same thing at the end, right? So their demand is the same, but it's that there's an information cost problem in one, explaining, let's say, explaining how animals are being hurt, and the female animals especially, how they're being tortured and living a very difficult life. I mean, any of these, whether it be animal or climate change, whatever it is, it's an education problem. And there's information costs associated with actually getting that information into the heads of those people that need to know, so we can make informed decisions for our earth and for each other and for the animals. So, so that's a barrier, I think. And technology generally, is being used to drive down information costs, right? So the internet, apps, various things like that generally are used for that. Whether it can be used successfully here is to be seen.
Thank you, Arvin. And I think this is a powerful discussion. Like, it's very interesting. I would be interested in other opinions. It's not just me who needs to talk. Like, that's how collective intelligence happens, by brainstorming and by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sue is saying that being open, beginner's mind, holding space for all voices, and letting go of control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Also,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was kicked out of a Dakota Pipeline meeting for mentioning veganism, and even though our messages overlap, we're both caring for the water, which they are also fighting for. But it felt like they were just focusing on the pipeline, and they started making fun of, vegans. How do you know somebody's a vegan? Because they will tell you, and other things. And I mean, from my perspective, also, I should have developed a thick skin and just stayed over there, but they kicked me out. So it's I think understanding both the perspective and trying to build on a common thread rather than focusing on differences probably would help us work together.
Michael?
Yes, hi. Yeah, that was a great presentation. I really like that you also made the differentiation between the why and the how. As many of you know, I'm an organizer with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and we make that differentiation too. We focus on the why for the outreach because we think that the how can be Googled. And as you said earlier, there's so many opinions on how to go about things, and there are many ways. But the why is based on facts, and so that's an important differentiation, I think. So thanks for that. And the other thing I was going to raise is that Arvin, I think you mentioned that there are many reasons why people go vegan, and in a way, the end result matters. And I used to think that for a long time. I've been vegan for almost 5 years. Up until maybe 1 year ago, I changed my stance on it. And because when we put ourselves into the position of the animal, what would the animal think? What's the value for the reason that people go vegan for their health? The animals won't really care about it. But when we say, well, the reason is to end the suffering, now the animals care because that's the prime reason why they will have a better life, right? Same with environment. I mean, environment's kind of in between somewhere, but to me, health is too anthropocentric. It's important, definitely, but it's too anthropocentric. And that's why Anonymous for the Voiceless really focuses only on the ethics.
Would you like me to comment on that?
Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to hear your opinion on this, on the different layers of this.
Well, I did mention that respecting the differences is important. So I start from that. So I thank you very much. Lots of respect for what you say. I think there's a lot of people who are coming from the health perspective. So in my opinion, I don't think they need to be turned away. And there's also so many strategies. Like for example, I've heard even, and this is something that I've heard from one of our advisors, Tobias Lienert, and he told me something like, we think as vegan activists that what drives change is health, environment, and ethics. What drives change is price, availability, and I don't remember the third. Price, availability, and
like social expectation, maybe.
It was something like that. It was 3 things, and I forgot the third one. Anyways, like it was very different from the perspective that we generally think about it. So it's not as much about what we think is the best approach. That's what I said about the how. There's so much difference, but it's about trying different approaches, being open to different approaches, and seeing and not turning one approach down versus another. So I wouldn't turn down the health approach. Social acceptance is definitely an important level. In fact, like on social acceptance, we sometimes we focus so much on turning people vegan, and the retention rate for keeping vegans is pretty bad. So that's also somewhere where we can focus. And I've read that it's up to 84% of people who try to go vegetarian and vegan who go back. So we need to like focus on also like retention and seeing it. And I think, and I'm mentioning it now because community is one of the most powerful things that people need in order to stay vegan. Like I experienced it myself, like when I went vegan, like about 6 years ago, and community is what really gave me the power and the strength. And not everyone is the same. For some, ethics is the right thing, but it's not the same for everyone.
So you guys know how words hold certain frequencies and they're all linked to emotions. So whenever we hear something, it goes into us and it creates this emotion in us. And I think the word vegan for a lot of people has been so badly linked to something that's just like people trying to, we all know these theories about vegans. And then we started using the word plant-based. So when I became vegan, it was all vegan. And then people started to be more like easy about it to call it plant-based. But even now plant-based, it's so similar to, I'm wondering, is there another term to make it more undercover what we're doing? Like basically to create another little term to make people, because people want to change the world and they want to do all these things. They have this good heart. At least that's what I want to believe. But I think a lot of people could be are still so against this word vegan and plant-based, and they're so, I don't know. Do you think there's another way to like hide it, what we are doing?
Sailesh, would you like to answer that? You can say it in a much. My answer would sound very much like yours. And
No, go ahead then.
well,
It's yours.
One of my mentors had said about the word vegan is that vegan means ahimsa and non-violence. We need to reappropriate this word. And that mentor is in this room. He knows who he is. But we do acknowledge that I acknowledge that there's some bad dogma around the word vegan, and that's why the Coalition for a Plant-Based, Just and Sustainable Transition, we can say food system reform. So that's also like food system reform is even more undercover if you want. So those are suggestions, but
I have to say it. I love non-violence. I love it. It's beautiful because it's really non-violence for your own body. It's non-violence for the other, for the animals, for the world. Non-violence is beautiful. I mean, we are saying violence if we say non-violence, but peace, I don't know. But non-violence is very beautiful. I've never heard this before. I like this a lot. Thank you.
I think that this is just an opinion that just emerged to me now on the spot. The problem is not the word vegan. The problem is sometimes what we do when we represent vegan. That is more the problem. So those are the things that perhaps we need to concentrate on changing, not the fact that vegan is a bad word. Vegan is a beautiful word. So just perhaps change that. There's a reason why there's a bad dogma, and perhaps it doesn't come just from the people that believe that they don't want to change. It's from some of the things that we do as well. So.
I have a thought on that, Soren, if I can add to that. I really agree with you, Soren, that the way sometimes it's associated is, I think that part of there's many things that dividing, let's say the right and the left, as far as the political side, left and right. But part of it is that the left is interpreted as self-righteous. And I think all parties, both sides, are engaging in judging, accusing, and blaming. So I call it jabbing, J-A-B, judging, accusing, blaming. I think we need to get away from that. And I think that's going to help, because if we disarm ourselves in that way, then they're not going to be afraid of being judged, being accused, being blamed. They're not going to associate veganism with self-righteousness and I'm judging you. I'm morally better than you. You know, all that stuff doesn't feel good. And so anyway, I think that we have to move away from that. And that's, yeah. So part of the material in our app is about that. It's about self-empowerment. It's about soul force. Soul force is another word for nonviolence. It's another word for satyagraha, back when Gandhi had his movement. But anyway, so it's trying to help people with that. And then Soren pointed out vegan advocacy, those vegan advocacy videos that were on his website there that he also suggested that we put in our app. Those are powerful because they do, I think they really reach people where they are. When you're the advocate, you have to remember the audience, right? Soren knows his stuff very well. So anyway, I think it starts though with disarming yourself, no judging, no accusing, no blaming, and then you gain that trust. And we as the left, we really need to do that, I think.